I didn't take the job as a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains because I wanted adventure. I wasn't chasing stories to tell around a campfire or some romantic idea of living among the trees. The truth is simpler and a little sadder. I just wanted to be forgotten. The mountains have a way of swallowing people whole. I knew that before I ever set foot here. The weather turns without warning. Storms roll down like crashing waves, and the trails stretch farther than the eye can follow. People disappear here every year. Hikers, campers, the occasional tourist who thought their phone's GPS would keep them safe. Sometimes their bodies are found months later, sometimes not at all. That was what drew me in. This wasn't a job to me. It was an escape. If I vanished here, I figured no one would come looking too hard. The first time I saw the mountains, they didn't welcome me. They loomed, jagged and unyielding, like the teeth of something waiting to devour me. Snow still clung to the highest peaks, even though it was summer. The tree lines stretched out in dark, endless carpets, broken only by silver rivers that glimmered like blades under the sunlight. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something hostile in that beauty. Something that told me I didn't belong. Driving into the ranger station for the first time, I remember passing a sign. It wasn't official, not like the government-issued wooden markers. This one was crude, nailed to a tree at the roadside. The words were carved deep, shaky, like whoever made it didn't want the message to fade. It said, "Don't stay out after dark." I thought it was a joke, some local trying to scare tourists, but the letters stuck in my mind, branded there like the edge of a warning I didn't yet understand. At the station, I noticed the other rangers weren't much for conversation. They greeted me politely enough, but there was distance in their eyes, as if they were holding back something. Even when they shook my hand, it felt like they were studying me quietly, judging if I would last a week out here. One of them, an older man with weathered skin and eyes pale as river ice, barely looked at me at all. He just muttered, "New blood never listens. Not until it's too late." That should have been my first sign to leave. But of course, I didn't. The cabin they gave me was small, sitting on the edge of a forest that looked thicker than it should. The windows faced the tree line, and at night, the trees seemed to crowd closer, as though they pressed against the glass when I wasn't watching. I told myself it was just my imagination. I wanted to believe that. But every night, before I slept, I swore I could hear something moving in the woods. Not animals, not wind, something deliberate, like footsteps. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already begun watching me. It was waiting for me to make a mistake, to step where I shouldn't, to forget the unspoken codes that the others already seemed to know. I wasn't told about the rules on my first night. Those came later, but the silence of the forest, the stares of the other rangers, and that crude roadside sign were all pointing me toward the same truth. There are rules in these mountains, rules you follow if you want to stay alive. I learned them the hard way, and I'm not sure I'll ever escape them. The morning after I moved into the cabin, I was summoned to the main ranger station. It was a squat building of dark timber and stone, its roof heavy with moss, its windows tinted so dark that I couldn't see inside until I stepped through the front door. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something metallic, like wet iron. Inside, the atmosphere wasn't what I expected. I thought I'd find chatter, maybe laughter between coworkers, the casual energy of people used to the wilderness. Instead, the room was quiet. 3 rangers sat around a long wooden table, coffee steaming in mugs they didn't seem interested in drinking. When I walked in, their eyes lifted in unison. For a moment, I felt like prey caught in a spotlight. Then one of them, a woman with sharp cheekbones and hair pulled tight under her cap, nodded once. No smiles, no introductions. Just a nod. The man I'd seen yesterday, the older ranger with pale eyes, was standing in the corner. He didn't sit with the others. He just watched me, his jaw clenched, his posture stiff. When I approached, He spoke before I could say anything. "You're the new one," he said. His voice was low, rasping like every word was dragged through gravel. I nodded, waiting for him to offer his name, but he didn't. Instead, he gestured toward a hallway. "Come with me." I followed him past an office lined with maps, bulletin boards, and shelves stacked with radios. We entered a smaller room in the back, windowless, lit by a single yellow bulb that flickered every few seconds. On the table between us sat a notebook, thick with pages that looked wrinkled from years of use. The cover was scarred, gouged with scratches, as though someone had once tried to destroy it, but failed. He sat down, motioned for me to do the same, and pushed the notebook toward me. "These are the rules," he said. "You'll follow them if you plan on staying alive out here." I let out a quiet laugh before I could stop myself. The man's eyes narrowed. His stare pinned me where I sat. Whatever humor I thought I'd find in the situation evaporated. "I'm not joking," he said. "You think the forest is just trees and trails. It isn't. It watches. It remembers. And if you don't respect it, it'll take you. Quick, if you're lucky. Slow, if you're not." He opened the notebook and tapped the first page. 7 lines were written there in neat, steady handwriting, each one short, each one strange. I read them slowly, my pulse quickening with every line. Rule 1. Always lock your cabin door at sunset. Don't open it again until dawn. Rule 2. Never whistle in the forest after dark. Something will answer. Rule 3. If you hear your name called from the tree line, know you didn't. Don't respond. Don't investigate. Rule 4. When you cross the river, never look into the water. If you do, keep walking. Do not stop. Rule 5. Sometimes, you'll see lights deep in the forest at night. They look like lanterns. Do not follow them. Rule 6. If you see a second moon in the sky, stay inside. Don't sleep. Don't move. Just wait. Rule 7. If a tall man waves to you from the clearing, pretend you didn't see him. Keep your eyes down and walk away. I stared at the list for a long time, then looked up at him. "This is a joke, right?" I said. Some kind of hazing thing for the new guy. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, the bulb above us humming faintly. "Do I look like I'm joking?" he asked. I didn't answer. Because no, he didn't. He sat back, folding his arms. "People die here," he said flatly. "They wander off the trails. They ignore warnings. They don't listen. And when we find what's left, if we find anything at all, it's never something you'd want to look at twice." The silence stretched. I tried to steady my breathing. My mind searched for explanations. Superstition. Tradition. Maybe he wanted to scare me, so I'd stay cautious. But the way he spoke, the dead weight in his voice, told me he believed every word. Finally, he stood. "Carry the rules with you," he said, closing the notebook and sliding it toward me. "Don't think you're different. Don't test them. They've been written in blood more times than ink." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't ask, because for the first time since I arrived, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, exactly, but the sense that I'd stepped into a place where the world didn't work the way it should, where whatever was out there didn't care if I believed in it or not. That night, when the sun dipped below the ridge, I found myself standing by the cabin door. My hand hesitated on the lock. It felt ridiculous locking a door when the nearest neighbor was miles away. But then I remembered his pale eyes, the finality in his tone. I turned the key, listening to the bolt click into place. And even though I told myself it was foolish, I didn't unlock it again until morning. The first few days passed in silence. I tried to lose myself in the routine, patrolling the trails, logging fallen branches, checking that campsites were clear. It was the kind of work I thought I wanted. Quiet, isolated, free of distractions. But no matter how hard I focused on the tasks, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes, as I walked, I'd feel eyes on the back of my neck. I'd turn around, scanning the trees, only to find nothing but stillness. No birdsong, no wind, just silence thick enough to press against my ears. By the fourth night, I'd almost convinced myself it was just nerves. That was when it happened. I'd just finished jotting down notes in my logbook when I heard it. A voice, clear, close, just outside the cabin. It said my name. At first I thought it was one of the rangers. Maybe someone had walked up the porch without me noticing. I stood, heart thudding, and went to the door. But when I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The notebook. The rules? Rule 3. If you hear your name called from the tree line. No, you didn't. I swallowed hard. The voice came again, softer this time, almost coaxing. Come outside, it whispered. It was my voice. Exactly my own. My skin prickled cold. I told myself it had to be a trick of the wind. Echoes in the mountains. Maybe. But part of me knew better. Against my better judgment, I moved closer to the door, pressing my ear to the wood. That was when the voice laughed. Not a full laugh, just a broken sound, cut short, like someone trying to remember how to do it. Then silence. I backed away, forcing myself to sit on the bed, every muscle in my body tight. The cabin seemed smaller than ever, the walls closing in, the shadows stretching too far into the corners. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, clutching the rule book, waiting for morning. The next day, I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd drifted close to sleep and dreamed the whole thing. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. In the dirt just below the porch steps, there were footprints. They weren't boots, not bare feet either. They were too long, too narrow, pressed deep into the soil like something heavier than a man had been standing there. And there were two sets, one facing the cabin, one facing away, as though something had come and left. I thought about telling the others, but when I saw them later at the station, the words stuck in my throat. They moved through their duties like shadows, eyes tired, expressions hard. If I told them, I knew what they'd say. We warned you. We gave you the rules. And maybe worse, they might think I wasn't cut out for the job. That the forest had already gotten into my head. That night, I did everything I could to prepare. I locked the door well before sunset. I checked the windows twice. I kept the radio on the nightstand, the rule book in my lap, but still, I couldn't shake the memory of that voice, my own voice calling me from the dark. I realized something then. The rules weren't there to scare me. They were there because this place knew how to find me, how to use me against myself, and if I slipped again, even once, I wasn't sure the cabin door would be enough to keep it out. The next few days blurred together. I tried to throw myself into the job, the way I was supposed to, clearing branches from the trail, checking signs for wear, logging animal tracks along the ridges. On the surface, everything felt routine, but underneath, I carried the memory of that voice, whispering my name outside the cabin. Every creak of the trees, every gust of wind that sounded like a syllable, made my skin crawl. I reminded myself of the rule. I'd followed it. That's why I was still here. But the forest doesn't give up easily. It waits, it watches, and sometimes, it tempts you in ways you don't expect. On the 6th evening, I was patrolling near the old suspension bridge that crossed the river. The sun was low, bleeding orange across the treetops, and I knew I needed to hurry back before nightfall. The rule about sunset lock your cabin door was etched deep in my mind now. I didn't want to test it. I started across the bridge, boards creaking under my boots, ropes groaning with each step. Halfway across, I made the mistake. I looked down. The water rushed below, dark and fast, reflecting the fading light. But what I saw wasn't the sky. The reflection was wrong. The trees weren't swaying the way they were above me. The ripples didn't match the wind. And in the shifting current, I saw faces, pale, hollow-eyed, pressed against the surface as though they were just beneath it. Their mouths opened and closed, silent, as if screaming without sound. Some of the faces looked like strangers, but one of them looked like me. I stumbled, gripping the rope so hard it burned my palm. The reflection of my own face in the water stared up, but it wasn't right. Its eyes were too wide, too dark, and its mouth moved on its own, forming words I couldn't hear. Then, all at once, the faces shifted. Dozens of hands broke the surface, reaching upward, stretching for my legs. Though the water itself remained undisturbed, the rope trembled in my grip as if the whole bridge were shaking. Though the air was still, my mind screamed to run, but my legs locked in place. The hands reached higher. The wrong version of me opened its mouth wider, impossibly wide, until the jaw seemed to unhinge. I thought it was going to pull me straight through the boards. The rule flashed in my head: don't look into the water. If you do, keep walking. Don't stop. I forced myself to move, dragging one boot forward, then the other, keeping my eyes fixed on the opposite bank. Every step felt like it took hours. The air thickened, heavy and wet, filling my lungs with cold. The rope bit into my skin until I thought it would snap, but I didn't look down again. I just walked. When I reached the end of the bridge, I nearly collapsed on the dirt. The moment my boots hit solid ground, the pressure lifted. The sounds of rushing water returned, normal again, as though nothing had happened. I turned back once, against my better judgment. The river looked ordinary, just water, but I knew better. The rules weren't about superstition. They weren't old ranger tales meant to scare rookies. They were warnings, and I had nearly failed one. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the sky was dark. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, sweat stinging my eyes. Inside, I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I was safe. But my mind replayed those faces again and again, rising from the water, reaching for me, pulling me closer to a place I couldn't escape from. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the forest edge, listening for any sign that something had followed me back across the bridge, and I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The rules weren't just there to keep me alive. They were there to remind me the forest was always trying to claim me. Every step I took, every choice I made, was another chance for it to succeed. After the river incident, I stopped pretending. The rules weren't superstition, and the forest wasn't just trees and trails. Something out there was waiting for me to slip. Every task, every patrol, every step across the dirt felt like walking on glass, quiet, deliberate, terrified of the sound it might make if I misstepped. But fear alone wasn't enough. I realized I couldn't survive here if I didn't understand what I was up against. Following the rules blindly might keep me alive for a while, but sooner or later, I'd make a mistake. And when that day came, I needed to know what I was facing. So one night, after the station had gone quiet and the other rangers had retreated to their quarters, I returned. The building was different at night. During the day, it was stiff but functional, a workplace. But in the dark, with only a few bulbs glowing low, it felt like a mausoleum. Every shadow stretched too far. Every floorboard groaned like something beneath it wanted out. I slipped into the back hallway where the pale-eyed ranger had first shown me the rule book. Past that room was a locked storage closet, the kind with a chain looped around the handles. The chain was old, rusted, held by a flimsy padlock. It took less than a minute with my pocket knife to snap it free. Inside were boxes stacked high, their cardboard sides torn and softened by damp. Folders spilled loose papers across the shelves. The air smelled like mold and dust, but underneath it, something else. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. I pulled the nearest box onto the table and opened it. Inside were incident reports, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. At first, they read like ordinary ranger files, notes about hikers twisting ankles, tourists getting lost. the occasional black bear sighting, but the deeper I read, the stranger they became. Unexplained disappearance. No signs of struggle. Campsite intact. Food untouched. Subject found 3 miles from trailhead. Severe lacerations. Cause unknown. Witness claims to have seen lights. Search party recalled. I flipped page after page, my fingers shaking. The dates stretched back decades. Some entries were so faded they were barely legible, written on typewriters long before I was born. But the patterns were always the same. Vanishing hikers, bodies in unnatural states, testimonies of things no one could explain. At the bottom of one box, I found a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, its corners frayed. Inside, the handwriting slanted downward, frantic, as though the writer's hand trembled with every line. The first entry was dated 1979. Day 4. They gave me the rules. I thought it was a joke. It isn't. Last night I heard my wife's voice outside the cabin. She's been dead 3 years. It sounded just like her. I almost opened the door. Almost. I felt my chest tighten. It was the same thing I'd faced only nights ago. I turned the page. Day 11. The lights were back. I followed them once. They led me to the river. I saw something waiting in the water. I think it wanted me to look. I think it wanted me to fall in. Another entry. Later, the handwriting nearly illegible. The rules are changing. When I started, they told me to follow the lanterns if I was lost. Now they say never to follow them. The forest changes the bait, and the rules change to keep up. But no one tells you until it's too late. My hands went cold. The rules weren't fixed. They weren't eternal truths carved in stone. They were reactions, desperate countermeasures against something always adapting, always testing new ways to lure people in. I flipped further, skimming through half-coherent scrolls. The entries grew darker, more erratic. It mimics, it knows my voice, my face. I saw myself at the tree line. Not a reflection, not a trick. Another me. It smiled when I looked at it. I don't think it'll smile next time. The last page was stained, ink smeared by water or sweat. If you're reading this, don't trust the others. Some of them follow the rules. Some of them follow the forest. You'll know the difference too late. The journal ended there. No signature, no closure. I sat back, the room spinning. My mind replayed the river, the voices, the footprints outside the cabin. Every detail matched the warnings in the book. Every danger had happened before, to someone else, and most of them hadn't made it out. I shoved the journal into my jacket and turned to the other boxers. The reports inside grew worse the deeper I went. One described a search party that vanished entirely, 6 rangers who never came back. Another told of a camper found hanging from a tree, skin pale, eyes blackened, though there was no sign of decay. In the margin, someone had scrawled, "Don't whistle." The further I read, the more I felt the air in the room pressing against me, as if the words themselves were opening a door, inviting something in. I closed the last file, my hands trembling, and forced the box back onto the shelf. On my way out, I paused at the door, listening. The station was silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me into the hallway. My own footsteps echoed too loudly, too close, like there was another pair just behind mine, mirroring me back at the cabin. I lit the lantern and spread the journal across the table. The words stared up at me, each line carving deeper into my mind. The forest had been claiming people for decades, strangers, hikers, anyone who wandered too far, and the rules weren't warnings so much as survival scraps, shifting with each encounter, rewritten in desperation. Every ranger before me had been playing the same game, and most of them had lost. I closed the book and sat in silence, the lantern flame flickering weakly. The thought struck me then, colder than anything I'd felt since arriving. The forest already knew me. It knew my voice. It knew my face. And now, after reading these pages, I knew just enough to realize how little chance I had of leaving. The days that followed blurred together. I worked my patrols, checked the trailheads, filled out my reports like any other ranger might. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual, but beneath it all, I could feel the change. The forest wasn't hiding anymore. It was watching. Every step I took, every turn of the trail, every pause to breathe, it felt like eyes pressed against the back of my neck. I tried to shake it off, but it never left. The silence of the woods wasn't natural silence anymore. It was expectation. I held breath. By the third night, after I'd found the journal, the weight of it became unbearable. I carried the book with me on patrol, tucked into my jacket as though it were armor. But words on a page can't protect you from what moves between the trees. That evening, when the sky dimmed into that gray between dusk and night, I knew something had shifted. The first sound was faint, just a twig snapping somewhere to my left. That wasn't unusual. Deer wandered close to the trail all the time. But then came another snap, and another, each one timed with my own steps, like a shadow copying my rhythm. I stopped. The woods stopped with me. Even the breeze seemed to pause. I called out softly, "Hello," though I knew I shouldn't have. My voice carried, and for a moment there was nothing in reply. Then I heard it. "Hello?" The exact same word, the exact same tone, my voice thrown back at me from the trees. The journal's words roared in my head. It mimics. It knows my voice, my face. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, pretending I hadn't heard. But then the forest tried again. Help. It was my voice, breaking, strained, desperate. The way I sounded when I thought I was about to drown in the river. But it wasn't me speaking. I clenched my jaw and walked faster. The rule was clear. Don't answer. Never answer. But the longer I ignored it, the louder it became. Each word came closer, like footsteps that I couldn't see. By the time I reached the fork in the trail, the voice was so near it could have been whispering into my ear. "Wait. Don't leave me here." I broke into a jog. Branches clawed at my arms as I veered off the trail, cutting across the undergrowth. The lantern in my hand shook, its beam jittering against the trunks. I wanted to make for the cabin, for the one locked place I could trust. But the forest wasn't about to let me. The lights appeared first, 2 of them, flickering like lanterns swaying gently in the dark. They hung low between the trees, not quite touching the ground, not quite rising like stars. I knew the rule, never follow the lights. But they weren't stationary anymore. They were moving closer, weaving through the branches like hunters circling prey. I tried not to look, but their glow burned in my peripheral vision. One swept across the trail ahead of me, blocking the path. The other drifted behind, cutting off my retreat. And then I saw it. Standing between those lights was a shape. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, a distortion caused by the lantern glow. But no, this was solid, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long for its frame. And where the face should have been, there was only mine. It looked like me. Not perfectly, not at first. The jaw hung wrong, the eyes were too wide, the skin pale as ash. But with every step it took toward me, the details sharpened. Its mouth twisted, reshaping, until it wore my expression, until it smiled with my own teeth. I froze. The urge to speak, to scream, to demand what it was nearly overtook me, but I held my tongue. I remembered the journal. I saw myself at the tree line. It smiled when I looked at it. I don't think it'll smile next time. It smiled at me now. My smile. Crooked, familiar, wrong. The forest pulsed around me, heavy and close. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew movement would only draw it in. So I did the only thing left. I shut my lantern off. Darkness swallowed me whole. The lights wavered, searching. The mimics stilled. And then, slowly, they began to drift apart. sliding back into the trees. For a moment, I thought it had worked, that I'd vanished from their sight. But then came the sound. Footsteps. My footsteps. Behind me, I spun, and there it was again, not 20 feet away, perfectly mirroring me in the dark. The lantern lights glowed faintly off its pale skin, and though its mouth didn't move, I heard my voice in the air. Let me in. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. Roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop. The cabin was close. I could feel it. Every second I pushed forward, the mimic pushed too, its footsteps crashing through the brush just behind me. It never gasped for breath. It never faltered. It just followed, tireless, endless. The cabin door appeared in the distance, a pale rectangle against the black. I threw myself against it, fumbling for the key with shaking hands. Behind me, the mimic's voice rose. A dozen voices now, all of them mine, layered on top of each other. Don't shut me out. Don't leave me. I'm cold. I'm hurt. I'm dying. Let me in. The key slipped twice before it caught. The lock clicked. I burst inside, slammed the door, and turned the bolt just as the footsteps reached the porch. The silence after was worse than the chase. I stood there, chest heaving, every nerve on fire. Then 3 knocks. Slow, measured, on the other side of the door. I backed away, the journal clutched tight in my hands. The knocks didn't come again. No footsteps retreated. No voice called. Only silence. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting at the table with the lantern lit, eyes fixed on the door. The forest had shown me what it could do, what it could become. It didn't just want me dead. It wanted me broken. It wanted me to open that door willingly. And as the sun finally broke over the peaks, one thought repeated in my mind, sick and unshakable. If it could wear my face, then what stopped it from wearing someone else's? When morning came, I tried to convince myself the night had been a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But the marks on the cabin door told me otherwise. Scratches, long, deliberate gouges in the wood ran parallel across the frame, as though something with fingers too sharp and too many had traced the outline of the lock. The mimic hadn't just knocked. It had tried to get in by the time I reached the station. My hand still shook. The pale-eyed ranger, the one who'd first given me the rules, was waiting. He sat behind the desk, calm as ever, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "You saw it?" he said. Not a question, a certainty. I wanted to deny it, but my throat was dry. I could only nod. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Most don't make it this far. They break one rule, then another, and that's it. Gone before they even understand what they're facing. But you're learning. I set the journal on the desk between us. Why didn't you tell me everything? I asked. Why leave me to stumble across this on my own? For the first time, his expression shifted. Not guilt, not surprise. Something closer to amusement. You wouldn't have believed me. You had to see for yourself. I opened the journal to the last entry, the smeared ink warning not to trust the others. Who wrote this? I asked. Was it you? The ranger's pale eyes flicked to the page, then back to me. I've been here a long time, he said softly, longer than most. Long enough to know that the forest doesn't want us gone, it wants us bound. And the rules, they're just chains, leashes. They keep us alive. Yes, but they also keep us in line. A chill spread through me. What are you saying? He stood, walking to the window. The forest stretched endlessly beyond, sunlight filtering weakly through the pines. He tapped a finger against the glass. It doesn't matter how far you run. You're already part of this place. The moment you stepped foot past the gates, it marked you. The rules don't keep you safe, they keep you chosen. I swallowed hard, the journal heavy in my hands. So you knew. I've always known, he said. That's why I give the rules to the new ones. Not to save them, to see which of them will last. to see which of them the forest wants to keep. The words struck like a hammer. My mentor, the one who had looked me in the eye and told me how to survive, wasn't protecting me at all. He was testing me, feeding me just enough to keep me alive until the forest itself decided whether I was worth taking. "You've been letting people die," I whispered. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Not letting, guiding. Everyone makes their choice. Everyone breaks a rule sooner or later. The forest doesn't waste energy on those who can't follow simple instructions. But those who can, those who adapt, they're valuable." I backed toward the door, my stomach twisting. "And what happens when it decides I'm valuable?" He finally turned, and in that moment, I saw it. The pale color of his eyes wasn't natural. They weren't just gray. They were washed out, hollow, as though the forest itself had seeped into him. He wasn't entirely human anymore. Or maybe he hadn't been for a long time. "You'll see," he murmured. His voice was calm, steady, but it wasn't reassurance. It was a promise. I left without another word, the journal clutched so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every step away from him felt like a step toward some invisible cliff edge. The forest didn't just haunt from the shadows, it lived inside the very people sworn to protect against it. And if he had already given himself over, then there was no telling how deep its roots ran. Back at the cabin, I tried to steady my thoughts, but the betrayal burned in my mind. The rules weren't a shield, they were bait, a way to sort prey from survivors. And my so-called mentor had been the hand that fed me into the jaws. That night, as I sat at the table, I heard footsteps outside, soft, measured, pacing across the porch. I froze, lantern dimmed low. The steps paused at the door, just as they had before, but this time, there was no knock, no mimicry of my voice. Instead, a whisper, not mine, his. "You're ready." The words slithered through the wood, curling into my ears. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The footsteps retreated slowly, melting into the forest's silence. I sat in the dark, every nerve screaming, and realized the truth. I wasn't just hunted by the forest anymore. I was being prepared for it. I didn't sleep after that night, not even for a moment. The whisper still crawled through my mind, echoing, knowing, "You're ready? Ready for what? For death, for something worse." By morning, the cabin felt smaller, tighter. The walls pressed closer, the air heavy like damp cloth. I packed my bag and silence compass, flashlight, water, and the journal. The rules rattled around my skull, each one sounding less like a guide and more like a trap. Don't look into the river. Don't follow the lights. Don't open the door to voices. Every command kept me alive, but at what cost? The forest hadn't killed me yet, and if my mentor was right, it wasn't because of luck. It was because I'd been chosen. But chosen for what? I left the cabin and walked toward the trailhead. The air was sharp with pine and cold earth. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like a ranger on patrol. I felt like prey walking into its own snare. By midday, I reached the overlook. The valley stretched wide below, ridges rolling endlessly, rivers glinting like veins of silver. It should have been beautiful, but all I saw was a cage. No matter how far the land stretched, the forest never ended. I wasn't leaving by following the trails. That much was clear. The journal had said the rules changed over time, adapted. Maybe there was a rule they hadn't told me yet, one that could set me free. Or maybe the only way out was to break one on purpose. The thought terrified me. Every near violation had nearly cost me my life. The voice at the door, the lights in the trees, the mimic wearing my face. Each had pulled me closer to the edge. But if the rules were chains, then maybe the only way forward was to cut them. The question was which one? I sat on the overlook until the sun began to sink. The forest grew restless with shadows, long and sharp. Whispers threaded through the branches, faint, almost curious. The air thickened. The choice pressed against me. As the last light drained from the sky, I made my decision. I would break one. Not recklessly, not by accident. Deliberately, I walked down to the river. The current murmured low, glinting under the half-moon. I could hear it before I saw it, the way it pulled and churned. Hungry. Rule 4. Don't look into the water at night. No matter what you think you see, it isn't real. I stood at the edge, my heart hammering, my breath shallow. This was it. The line between survival and surrender. If the rules were lies, this would prove it. If they were truth, then I wouldn't live to regret it. The surface rippled, and something shifted beneath. Shapes rose slowly, indistinct at first. Faces, dozens of them, eyes open, mouths moving. Some I recognized tourists I'd seen on the trail. A hiker reported missing last week. And then my mother. Her smile, her lips forming my name. Tears burned my eyes. It wasn't her. I knew it wasn't. But the sight made my knees weak. Her hand lifted from the water, pale and dripping, reaching. I leaned closer, just enough to see. And that's when I understood. The faces weren't calling me to join them. They were screaming. Their mouths were wide, stretched, soundless, but I saw the agony in their eyes. Not bait, prisoners. The river wasn't just a reflection, it was a grave. The forest kept them, swallowed them, used them as lures. And if I broke this rule, I would become one of them. I staggered back. Choking on air, the journal pressed against my chest. No, not this one. Not tonight. The forest hissed in the branches overhead, angry, restless. The mimic voices rose, my own words thrown back at me from the dark. Coward. Run. Let me in. I turned from the river and ran. Branches whipped, roots clawed, but I didn't care. I wasn't playing its game anymore. I wasn't going to die bound by rules that only fed the thing in the trees. By the time I reached the cabin, I was gasping. The lantern still sat on the table where I'd left it. I lit it, heart pounding, and opened the journal one last time. The last entry blurred under my shaking hands. Don't trust the others. Some follow the forest. The pale-eyed ranger's face flashed in my mind, his whisper curling through the wood. You're ready? Maybe he was right. Maybe I was. But not for what he thought. I shut the journal and made my choice. Tomorrow, I'd leave. Not by the trails, not by the rivers. I'd go straight into the heart of the forest, where the rules were born. If it wanted me, it could have me, but on my terms. Because if I stayed, the rules would break me. And if I fled, the forest would follow. The only way to survive was to face it head on, even if it killed me. At dawn, I left the cabin. The forest was gray with mist, the air sharp and still. I carried nothing but the journal, a knife, and the lantern. No compass, no map. What good were tools when the ground itself bent against you? I walked into the trees, not along the trail, but deeper, where the roots coiled thick and the canopy swallowed the sky. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the earth tried to hold me back. But I kept moving. The rules had kept me alive this long. Now I would find out who or what had written them first. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't work the same once I crossed a certain point. The light dimmed even as the sun rose. The air grew colder until frost clung to the branches, and then I found it. A clearing, perfectly circular, as though carved into the forest floor. In the center stood a stone pillar, weathered, cracked, its surface carved with words in a dozen different hands. Rules, hundreds of them, layered over each other, scratched deep by those who had come before. Some I recognized, some were different, some were crossed out. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the air. The journal pulsed in my hands, as though the words inside it had been waiting for this moment. That's when I saw the figures, shadows at the tree line, still as stone, dozens of them. their faces pale, their mouths open, the lost rangers, the hikers, all those who had broken the rules. Their eyes fixed on me, hollow, endless, and among them, one face stood out, my own. It smiled. I dropped the journal and staggered back, but the stone pillar hummed low, deep in the earth. The words carved into it shimmered, shifting like living things. One line burned brighter than the rest, carved fresh as though for me. Rule 10. Write the rules for the next one. Keep them alive until the forest is ready. I felt something cold slip into my chest. The clearing spun. The whispers of the lost filled my head, urging, demanding, not to run, not to fight, to obey. And in that moment, I understood the truth. There was no leaving. The forest didn't take you all at once. It hollowed you out. It filled you with its words, its rules, its voice, until you weren't prey anymore. You were part of the snare. When I woke, I was back at the cabin. The journal lay open on the table, its pages blank. A pen rested beside it. And outside, I heard footsteps on the porch. A new ranger, a knock at the door, a voice calling out. I reached for the pen, my hand steady now. My own voice whispering what the forest already knew. It's my turn to write the rules.